All right, there is a whole lot to talk about in the world of the UFC, and who better to discuss this plethora of high-level news than the legend himself, who called the big heavyweight title fight at UFC 260 on Saturday, as we saw the reign of Francis Ngannou begin. We welcome back Jon Anik to the program. Jon, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. It's always good to be with you. Was that only 5 days ago? Is that what you're telling me? Francis Ngannou's win feels like at least half a month ago, given this MMA news cycle. But lot to get to as usual, my friend.
Absolutely. It's good to see you as always. Before we discuss what Francis actually did in the octagon on Saturday, I mean, the feeling before and like every second of that fight, Jon, it was just intense. Doesn't really do it justice. Like, there's intensity in every fight, but this fight in particular between Stipe Miocic and Francis Ngannou, can you compare the intense feeling to other fights you've called?
Well, I think anything that is championship level brings out a certain intensity and anxiousness, right? Even, from 115 pounds all the way up to the heavyweights, at least for us, because we are fans at our core and we feel a lot of those emotions, I think, that fans feel sitting at home, whether you have an athlete that you're rooting for or whether your team's in the Super Bowl. I mean, we feel the championship stakes as fight fans. But man, Francis Ngannou is special. There's no doubt about it. Even dating to his UFC debut in 2015, I think a lot of us felt like we had something special on our hands. And even if you go back to the knockout of Alistair Overeem, I think late 2017, and you see the way Joe Rogan and I reacted, we called a knockout. But immediately our focus shifts to the well-being of a man, Alistair Overeem in this case, and hoping that he is okay. So this is a special athlete. It's crazy to think about what could have been in terms of other professional athletic endeavors had he gotten off to an earlier start and had resources at his disposal. But 13 UFC fights, to the surprise of some, it took him that long to be a UFC heavyweight champion. But Francis Ngannou's the best in the world, and best of luck to Johnny Bones and anyone else trying to dethrone that man right now.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, like, as soon as the fight ended, like the UFC 220 fight, like if this Ngannou had showed up in Boston that night, like a very calm, composed Ngannou, and he beat Stipe, and then, the different guy went in there and fought Derek Lewis, and then he had those like 4 quick knockouts in a row, like this would be a completely different conversation right now. Like, we're talking, like, he would be the GOAT right now. Like, he would be the greatest heavyweight champion of all time. Like, has that thought crossed your mind at all?
Yeah, and that version who showed up in Boston in 2018 is just so different than this version. This version didn't exist in many ways, shapes, and forms. I remember when Francis got to our fighter meeting in Boston 3.5 years ago now, and he put his head down on the table like the dude was toast by the time he arrived at the fighter meeting because of everything that he needed to do media-wise. And as you know, he had nothing resembling a good training camp in terms of the preparation. It was a quick turn, obviously, from the Alistair Overeem fight. And, he's not the excuse-making type, but he never should have taken that fight. So now he has been living his life as a devoted mixed martial arts athlete for the better part of 3.5 years. And I think the results speak to that. Still not a lot of film on the guy, either for his coaches or other coaches to assess. But he's the scariest power puncher for me in UFC history. And I think even if you had Anthony Rumble Johnson and Derek Lewis on here as guests, they'd probably give him that distinction too.
Just the composure he showed, not rushing anything. Even when he had Miocic in trouble, like, he was still very relaxed and composed about it. Like, that was just something to watch. Like, we expected somewhat of a more composed fighter. We knew he needed that, but to actually see it play out cage side, what was that like for you?
Well, his coaches deserve a lot of credit. Eric Nixick, Dewey Cooper, Kamaru Usman's get a lot of credit, and rightfully so, for just being this calming influence who has a few buzzwords that seem to really help Francis. But I do believe it's going to be hard for Francis to sustain over 25 minutes, right? He passed this test, stuff to take down, got a takedown of his own. You know about some of his other offensive skills. But if somebody can extend him, even this version, I still think that cardiovascular strength is going to be an issue for him because all of his motions are big and they're high energy. So I still think if you can extend Francis Ngannou, there are tests that he's going to have to pass. But as far as what was presented him this night, team deserves a lot of credit for putting him in a position to succeed, and he deserves a lot of credit. It's one thing that we all know we need to relax. I mean, even when I'm going for a 5-mile run, I know I need to focus on my breathing. That doesn't mean I necessarily do it 90% of the time. So good for Francis, good for the team. Very happy for all involved.
you obviously call the action as you see it take place. But when Stipe goes for that takedown in the first round and Francis lands that Francis Ngannou like powerful sprawl, like what is going through your mind? I mean, come on now. We were just like, I was talking to John Gooden about this, and I was like, I go back to Happy Gilmore when he lands that long putt against Shooter McGavin in the Tour Championship, and he goes, "Oh, Happy learned to putt. Right. Francis learned to sprawl." Like, what is going through your mind when you're seeing that sprawl?
I'm not surprised. Stipe's not surprised. Stipe came out a little flat. I mean, he'd be the first to tell you, and then there's maybe some mental things or mistakes that he made that he sort of softly alluded to on social media. But Stipe was not at all surprised to see an improved version. I mean, he understands the professional athlete that he is sharing the octagon with, you know? And for those out there suggesting that Stipe should have been favored based upon the body of work or the first meeting, do they understand what we're dealing with in terms of Francis Ngannou and some of the physical gifts? Like, do people understand what we are dealing with? I can't give you enough superlatives when it comes to Francis Ngannou, but I was not the least bit surprised that this was a much improved version. I think it'll be interesting when he fights somebody who has a more layered takedown game, a la Jon Jones, to see how he holds up under that type of pressure. But I don't know, man. Every round begins on the feet, and you got to solve Francis. Like, those first 2 minutes are absolutely critical. But by the time Stipe got to his stool in round 2, as you guys can attest, orbital might have been broken. I mean, the dude was buckled by the time he got to the stool at the beginning of round 2. So I don't know. I wasn't surprised at all by what I saw Saturday night.
Yeah, you've probably seen the narratives by now. Like, one, Stipe came in lighter than the fight at UFC 220. 2, the smaller cage. Like, obviously Stipe likes to rely on a lot of movement, or anybody who fights Francis Ngannou needs to work on the movement, but Francis was able to slowly cut things off when he needed to. Like, do you think that made any difference? Like, if they fought in a 30-foot cage, a 50-foot cage, a 100-foot cage, do you think that fight goes any differently?
Well, it's a good question. I do think if you asked Jon Jones which cage size he would prefer for the Francis Ngannou matchup, he would unequivocally ask for the big guy. And I think Stipe would do the same. Even though Stipe was able to maximize the 25-footer against Daniel Cormier and use it to his advantage, I thought in this matchup it favored Francis. And I might have said this to you before, Mike, but Matt Mitrione used to text me back in the day when maybe fighters didn't know which octagon was going to be showing up to Mohegan Sun or wherever they were going to be fighting. And he'd be like, dude, which octagon is it? And especially for a heavyweight, all you got to do is back up a couple steps and your heel is on the octagon. So not a lot of room in which to maneuver. I do think it is a factor in most of these matchups. And I think the athletes that don't account for it could pay the price. But Stipe trains at a 24-footer, a foot smaller than this 25-footer. He was ready to go. I just think he ran into the better athlete. And at least right now, I think overall, Ngannou's probably the better fighter, as crazy as that might sound to some people.
Yeah, Stipe, obviously one of the all-time great people, all-time great fighters, great champion, greatest UFC heavyweight of all time. And this loss, I don't care what anybody says, doesn't take anything away from him in that regard. But in terms of what fans and people imagine and draw up as a heavyweight champion of the world, like, Francis is the definition of that. Like, the size, the strength, the look, his power. Like, he's a super nice guy when he speaks, but terrifying to look at and watch fight. Like, this is the definition of like what casual fans and like people who don't watch combat sports, when they think of a UFC heavyweight champion, like Francis Ngannou, like, checks off all the boxes, is he not?
Well, yeah, the weight class goes up to 266 pounds. And again, this lazy Stipe as underdog narrative that continues to be out there. Oftentimes he's giving up weight. Not always 30 pounds. When he's fighting like a Fabricio Verdum, he's not giving up 30 pounds per se. But he's a small guy relative to the weight class Stipe is. So it's not all that surprising when he finds himself a very slight underdog when he's weighing in 30 pounds below the weight class's limit. So I'm excited to see what Francis Ngannou can do. I think the real challenge for him is just going to be motivation and being willing to put training camp upon training camp together, because Stipe tries to be the perfect guy in training, like training camp in and training camp out. And Amanda Nunes and all of these fighters who have sustained over 8, 10 championship level training camps. That's a hard thing to ask. So I'm excited to see Francis title defense #1. You know, hopefully it happens here in the next few months. I don't need to wait till December to see him and Johnny Bones, but we'll see. I think it's very exciting at the potential as to what the UFC has on its hands right now.
Yeah, I mean, with this whole Ngannou-Jones situation, the idea of this fight and talking about it is much easier to think about and discuss and get excited about than it will be to actually put this all together, because we've already seen what's been going on social media with Jon Jones. So I'm curious, not that you have any idea what's going on in the boardroom, are you confident we see this fight in 2021? Like, I feel like this is the biggest fight we can make, but I feel like it's going to take a while to get where we need to go.
Well, I think there are two schools of thought, right? You strike while the iron is hot, or you take the risk of having Francis Ngannou fight somebody like Derek Lewis to try to capitalize on Francis Ngannou's obvious momentum right now. Jon Jones would be the only one who could tell you what his ideal timeline is. I think for Francis Ngannou, probably July, International Fight Week would probably align for Francis. I don't know if Jon Jones wants that fight in July. I think he would probably prefer to have more time. That's speculation. It's not even informed speculation. But again, the Derek Lewis fight, calculated or otherwise, is a tremendous risk. I mean, Derek Lewis is one of the most decorated knockout artists in UFC history. And if Francis is one in terms of the power equation, Derek Lewis is 1A. So I'd like to see Ngannou and Lewis. But again, if Derek Lewis wins that fight, then all of a sudden Francis needs a W to all of a sudden get back to a Jon Jones fight that is preserved, at least right now. So we'll see how it plays out. I certainly trust the greatest promoters in the world to figure out a way to get what could be singularly the biggest fight in UFC history done.
Yeah, I just want to see Jon Jones in there at heavyweight at 245, 250, just to see how he does, whether it's against Ngannou or Derek Lewis. But I feel like Ngannou is just so massive, and we got to get this thing done. Everybody's talking about it, but Jon's a hard guy to please, man. He deserves what he wants. He's been doing this for so long, but interesting times indeed, Mr. Anik. But no card this Saturday, a rare weekend off on April 10th on ABC. Marvin Vettori needs a new opponent after Darren Till broke his collarbone. Kevin Holland, I'm told, is willing to get back on the horse after the loss to Derek Brunson. Are you calling that one on ABC?
I will be there, yes. Nice little day fight card on the American Broadcasting Company. So, that'll be nice. I think we got 8:30 a.m. maybe first fight Vegas time. But yeah, I'll be there. And for me, honestly, it's really devastating for Darren Till. It's an unbelievable main event. But I got 30 fighters that I'm prepping. You know what I mean? So not to say that he's one of 30. I mean, you can argue next to Vettori. I mean, he's as important as any in the 30. But I got 30 athletes to sort of wrap my head around. So I'll be busy regardless of who slots in there against the Italian Dream.
Can we get you a yellow ABC Wide World of Sports sport
I went public with the request, as kindly as I could request it of our ESPN head honcho, Glenn Jacobs. So hopefully he's watching this interview and we can expedite things, because we got to get some jacket measurements. DC and I, we fluctuate a little bit. We're not always on fight weight. So hopefully we can get that done by April 10th.
Yes, I'm with you on that one. So from there, we go Whitaker Gastelum, April 17th, and then UFC 261 goes down April 24th in Florida. Three title fights, excuse me. You got Usman versus Masvidal in the main event. Full house, things sold out in minutes. How excited are you, one, for the card? And then to add on top of that, the fights, the fans, et cetera. This is as close to normal as we'll be getting in quite some time, Jon.
Oh, it's all about the fans for me. You would think it would be all about this championship triple header, but I cannot wait to have fans in the building. We got a little taste on Fight Island, and we were separated by those hockey boards, as many of you guys know. I'm curious what the landscape is going to be like. Can I actually fist bump some of these fans, even if my wife would be against that initiative? I want the interaction with these people because they are the lifeblood of the sport, and I have missed them terribly. I think I've missed them more than anyone on the broadcast team. Yeah, it's easier to sort of navigate things. It's very convenient to go to the UFC Apex. It's 5 minutes from the host hotel. Everything's in front of you. You know where things are going to be. But I look forward to being back on the road 25 weeks a year, being with the greatest fans in sports. And it's not so much that it's a crutch for me as far as the broadcast is concerned, but I really can use that crowd to my advantage, and I look forward to having them behind me. And obviously, no surprise that the UFC is blowing it out with three huge fights. And Andrade and Shevchenko might be the smallest of the three, but I'm really excited to see what Jessica can do, given her wealth of UFC and championship experience against the seemingly unbeatable Valentina Shevchenko. So you'll be seeing me trying to give that fight some shine leading up to April 24th, Mikey.
Yeah, that's a good one. And then obviously Zhang Weili versus Rose Namajunas is just a dream. We got the power and the speed of Zhang Weili, the international appeal against the sharp, crisp, unbelievable boxing of Rose Namajunas, who's looking to get her title back. I mean, this is the stuff that dreams are made of, John. This is like a fantasy fight for 115 pounds, which is such a loaded division, and it never lets you down.
I'm waking up at 6:30 a.m. tomorrow to do media for a couple of Chinese outlets. We got to rip early in the morning, so hopefully I can put a sentence together at that hour. But it's been a while, right? And you talk about capitalizing on momentum when it comes to Francis Ngannou. You know, that's one of the best things you can do as a UFC champion or a high-level fighter is to stay in the consciousness of fans. And even if you want to say that fight week for Kevin Holland against Derek Brunson wasn't a super productive week, he remains in the consciousness of fight fans and looks like he might have another big opportunity here on the horizon. So I can't wait to see Zhang Weili back. I can't wait to see Rose Namajunas on the proving ground, of course. You know, when people ask me, Mike, what's the most memorable moment I've had in that broadcast booth, it's Rose Namajunas against Joanna Jędrzejczyk. And this is the division that is deepest in the women's game, and by a significant margin. I mean, go look at the women ranked 10 through 20. I know you all aren't privy to the 15 through 20 necessarily, but go look at the top 20, 25 at 115 pounds. There are a lot of challengers waiting for Zhang Weili. And by the way, I just watched back the fight between Zhang Weili and Joanna Jędrzejczyk, and I don't know, man. I kind of thought Joanna might have won the fight, right? So Joanna's right there, and you know that she wouldn't need much notice to come back and be in a championship setting again. So yeah, man, we're in a good spot. I mean, when you see some of these media outlets lay out all the big fights that are on the horizon in the next 3 months, it's a nice way to kill a football off season, I can tell you that.
Yeah, I have to go back and watch it again more closely. I actually scored it for Joanna fight night because I had to do like round by round coverage and score every round. I actually scored it for Joanna on fight night. It was so close. Like, this, no robbery in any way, but it's just one of those fights that could have absolutely gone either way. It's the definition of it.
I think the helmet kind of hurt Joanna by the end of the fight. And I was just watching it back at DC at one point in round 4. He's like, oh, right on the bubble. I'm like, really, bro? Really? But yeah, no, I very much look forward to the future of that division and to see if Zhang Weili can defend this belt again, because obviously she was taken to deep waters in that previous defense.
Absolutely. And then we're going to do it all again with the fans the following month. UFC 262, May 15, Charles Oliveira versus Michael Chandler to crown a new lightweight champion. But we just found out earlier this week the co-main event will be Leon Edwards versus Nate Diaz. And not only is it the co-main event, it's the first ever 5-round non-title co-main event in UFC history. So when you found out about this piece of business, John, were you as shocked as everybody else seemed to be?
Well, this is why this is the greatest sport in the world. It really is. And yes, I did not see this one coming a mile away. You know, Nate Diaz is obviously strategic when it comes to matchups and fights that he picks. And he, unlike most fighters in the space, can really call his shot because everybody would sign on the dotted line. You know, I used to say to Dominic Cruz at 135 pounds, find me a bantamweight that's going to say no to the Dominic Cruz fight coming off a win. You know, unless you're the number one contender, you are absolutely going to take that fight. So there are a lot of different layers, a lot of different wrinkles to that particular matchup. I love the fact that it's 5 rounds, but how about the fact that, like, the Super Bowl's every February and we know it, right? But with the UFC, it's like all of a sudden a fight like this can seemingly come out of thin air. It's 6 weeks away and it feels like the Super Bowl. Like, I'm going to Houston, Texas. That feels like the biggest sporting event of the year. And by the way, UFC 261 kind of feels like that as well. So that's something that's very unique to our sport, is that all of a sudden, 2 months out, a sporting event that's as big as any on our calendar all year can just surface. And Nate Diaz, Leon Edwards could obviously be headlining a pay-per-view. Thankfully, they get 5 rounds to settle their business, and it's a few short weeks away.
Yeah, Oliveira versus Chandler for the lightweight title. What are your thoughts on that one? Because obviously I think we all knew that the Khabib train was gonna go to the coaching side. He's done a great job thus far. He's going to continue that on this weekend. But you know, what are your thoughts on this particular matchup being made? Because a lot of people are like, oh, where's Justin Gaethje in this whole thing? What are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I can't speak to why Gaethje is not a part of this equation. I mean, certainly his resume is as good as anyone's. I think Dustin Poirier is the guy hardest to deny a championship opportunity, undisputed or otherwise right now, but he has business to attend to with Dustin Poirier. This is the fight that makes sense. And even if you go to Dustin Poirier's comments after the win over Conor McGregor in January, Charles Oliveira was really the name on the tip of his tongue. I mean, he acknowledged that this trilogy with Conor for a belt or otherwise was going to be completed. But Charles Oliveira, don't sit here and knock his strength of schedule, whether it's Tony Ferguson with his extended winning streak or Charles Oliveira, the one that's active right now. You put together a winning streak like this at 155 pounds and you cap it with a win over Tony Ferguson. Charles Oliveira is championship worthy. And, I don't know that you can penalize Michael Chandler for the lack of UFC experience. I mean, he certainly maximized his first opportunity and did to Dan Hooker what a lot of elite level lightweights weren't able to do. And Chandler's so humble, he'll say, oh, Paul Felder and Dustin Poirier softened Dan Hooker up for me, because he's a man of humility. But I am not somebody who's going to turn his nose up when a guy gets a championship opportunity. So is Chandler as deserving as Charles Oliveira, who's been in the UFC since he's 20 years old? Probably not. But I think it's a very exciting fight. I think it's essentially a pick'em. I haven't seen the betting line, but it's a pick'em fight to me. And, we'll see if Charles Oliveira can keep it going. I think he'll be a slight favorite. We'll see.
Yeah, I think you're probably right on that. And a good thing about Chandler, too, is when that phone rings and they say, Michael, you want to fight this guy in 2 weeks or 3 weeks? He says yes, and he was rewarded with this fight. And good on him. I'm happy to see him come over, get that big win, and now he gets a chance to become a champion. This is big stuff for a great guy in this sport. And is kind of going back to the Leon Edwards Nate Diaz fight. As shocking as finding out that fight is how I reacted to it. And as interesting as this news was, you can't help but feel for Anik and Florian podcast family member Bilal Muhammad, who got his big opportunity to fight Leon Edwards. He gets poked in the eye, the fight is stopped, and he kind of gets left behind here. So what do we do with Bilal now, John? I know he's one of the fastest rising game show hosts in MMA right now. He should still get a big fight, right? Come on now.
I love the game show, and we all appreciate the plug of Bilal's video podcast. Friday nights now on the Anik and Florian podcast YouTube channel, I believe. But you got to give him a main event. I mean, that's really the simple answer, Mike. You give him a main event because this main event essentially got taken away from him. And I understand why the promotion is moving forward with Leon Edwards. I feel for Bilal not having this fight come around again, but I don't think he was surprised to see them go in this direction. Maybe he was surprised to see Nate Diaz kind of come out of nowhere, but I think the writing was on the wall in terms of Leon Edwards getting a fight with somebody in that top 5 or top 3 even. And Nate Diaz is an outlier the way Jorge Masvidal is. It doesn't matter what number is next to his name. He represents one of the biggest fights in the sport, and you take that fight every day of the week. You just got to give Bilal a main event, and I think that might get one of the elite welterweights to sign on the dotted line because it would be a 5-round fight. So that, to me, is the way to make it right with Bilal, and hopefully he pushes for that because there's a lot of residue that comes with that's good for a fighter when you're building yourself the way Bilal is. So hopefully he and Ali Abdelaziz can really be forceful about that request. Because to me, if the Edwards fight doesn't come around again, the only way that Team Muhammad can make it right is to make sure that his next fight is a main event. So we'll see if they can get it done.
Well, sir, we could go another hour at least with everything going on in the world of the UFC. Thank you as always, my man. Make sure everyone checks out the latest Anik and Florian podcast recapping 260. I know Ray Longo, as always, was there. But did I see right? You caught up with the great Brian Stan?
We did. I only bother Brian Stan with fight predictions when it's a big fight. So I texted him before Stipe and Francis, and he was super convicted in his belief that Francis Ngannou was going to win the fight. So and then the fight played out the way it did, and not that I was giving him a chance to sort of, puff out his chest because he's the last guy in the world that would do that. But I just wanted to hear his thoughts on Francis and the evolution, because I think Brian was one of the guys who sort of believed in him from a very early time. And Brian was not the least bit surprised to see the Cameroonian finally break through. So always good to hear from the greatest living American. You know that.
Yeah, you're the man, John. Appreciate it as always. And enjoy the fights on April 10th. Hopefully you get that ABC jacket, man. It would be so cool to see.
From your mouth to Glenn Jacobs' ears. Thank you, buddy.
Thanks, man.